Hello and welcome to the Apologetics 315 podcast with your hosts Brian Auten and Chad Gross. Join us for conversations and interviews on the topics of apologetics, evangelism, and the Christian worldview.
Listen. You smell something?
Hello, this is Brian Auten, joined today by Chad Gross. How you doing, Chad?
I'm doing very well. Had a holly jolly Christmas. Glad to be back.
Yes, me too. I know you can see in the background here this newly acquired Boba Fett helmet. You can just pay homage now.
It is a thing of beauty.
Yes. Yes, we acquired a family heirloom. This is the way. This is the way. Just want to put that out there right now.
But I'm wondering, are you going to get like the whole suit? Are you going to get his whole armor?
No, but only because it's too expensive.
If you had the money, you would.
I was actually, there's a website called bobamaker.com or something like that. It's actually UK based. And there's a dude who makes like hardcore, really detailed Boba Fett costumes, like the whole deal.
Wow.
Like you're going to pay thousands of dollars for this, but it would be like worthy of, hey, I'm going to go to Comic-Con and people will bow down before me, or I'm going to go to movie premieres and make money getting photographs and stuff. So this is sort of an alternative possible side gig. No, I'm just joking. But
you're just going to buy it in pieces. I get it. You're going to buy the outfit in pieces. Like each Christmas, you're going to buy a new section of the armor until you have the whole thing. And then Carl will be old enough to don the outfit.
From what I've heard, that's what people do. They'll be like, I got my, like if you go to this website, you'll see customer testimonials and they'll be like, oh, I got my helmet. It is so perfect. It's even better than like the real thing, And then they're like I'm just, I'll be working on getting the next, pieces pretty soon. And like, okay, this is like people investing, into their armor.
Right.
And,
right.
they have to, go do some bounties, get their credits, and then they have to go purchase more armor, I guess. Yes.
So
now,
while we're talking about toys, I'll make a confession. I have a small collection of Masters of the Universe. Do you remember He-Man and Skeletor? And
yes.
Yeah. So there were a few years ago, they came out with a version of He-Man and Skeletor that looked a lot like the originals I had as a kid. And one of my fondest memories as a kid is when I was 5 years old. I was at my grandfather's house. I remember the place I was sitting, and I remember opening this box and He-Man and Skeletor being in there. And I just mentioned to my kids or my wife, I said, I'd really, that would be so cool to have He-Man and Skeletor just to kind of hang up, or display in the package. And well, they got me that. But since then,
nice.
They've started slowly releasing other Masters of the Universe stuff. And so whether it's my birthday or Christmas or whatnot, I tend to get a few Masters of the Universe things.
So
my collection is slowly growing.
Very good.
That's right.
Very good. It's like they only release one or two because you're like, oh, well, I can do that.
Exactly.
I can get a couple, I'll get that. And then they're like, if you would have released them all at once, you'd be like, no way, I don't need all that stuff,
I know.
The first one's free.
Yeah, exactly. They hook you. Exactly. I know. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to talk about today. I think we're going to do extra long show, the action figure episode.
All right. I'm game. That's sweet.
Boba Fett was truly the best action figure. I had all the Star Wars stuff, and that was the one that was like in every little fantasy that a kid plays out. Like Boba Fett's like the hero or the main dude,
Right. Yeah, my brother was a huge Boba Fett fan.
Yeah, so did you watch The Mandalorian as you were assigned, or did you stray?
No, not yet. Not yet. In my defense, Christmas was weird because of COVID. And so, we did Christmas together on Christmas Day. Then we went, and then I forgot. Christmas Eve, we went to my mom's. Then Christmas Day, we were together. Then the next day, we visited a small group of family. And then the next day, we visited a small group of family. Then Emma had her wisdom teeth out. And so she's been incapacitated, as you can imagine. She had all 4 wisdom teeth and 3 baby teeth out.
Wow.
At the same time. So I haven't had a lot of viewing time.
Yes.
But Mandalorian is on my list. We probably just
Good.
lost a lot of listeners because I haven't watched The Mandalorian. You realize that, right?
Well, we probably lost
It's
a lot of
over.
listeners. If you're still listening and you're saying, hey, it's like it's February or something when this is released and you're talking about Christmas, sorry. Well, topics we're going to discuss today, maybe a little bit of reading we've been doing. We're going to talk about maybe some tips for the local church in supporting apologists, some criticisms maybe. Over Christmas time, I picked up this book that was just sitting around, and I don't know where it came from or how long it's been in the house, but I just thought, I'll look at it and see what it is. It's called The Life You've Always Wanted by John Ortberg. The subtitle's Spiritual Disciplines for Ordinary People. So I thought, I'll have a read. So I've kind of been working my way through it. One of his big influences is Dallas Willard.
Oh,
And
wow.
of course, Dallas Willard is a Christian philosopher, but he's also big on the disciplines, spiritual disciplines. I think he's written a book called The Spirit of the Disciplines, that sort of thing. He's a big influence in the life of J.P. Moreland. And so I, read this, I haven't not done with it, but I've reading the book, started it reading with a little bit of, this is just like your best life now or something. But there's a lot of good stuff in there. It's not apologetics, but there's a lot of things that he covers that are challenging when it comes to the realm of spiritual disciplines. For instance, silence, seclusion, being alone, getting time where you're just having times of silence and things. I guess one of the challenges, for me, that's a challenge because I have this more of a driven personality of like, how much content can I cram between my ears? And I've really had to try to break that. And in a couple podcasts ago, we talked about that guy who's written a book about range, where it's good to have a broad variety of inputs.
Right.
Well, and I like that for its strengths. But I suppose in my tendency would be, a new book, that looks interesting. Let's download that on the Kindle. Or, there's a new podcast. Let's just keep adding information. And it's like scattered rather than having a range where maybe the ideal being that you are more intentional with your range of subjects and you're gaining understanding. Instead, it's more like the negative aspect would be just being scattered or just taking in so many voices that you don't process them or whatever. So in this book, the challenge for me has been, and he quotes Dallas Willard, the relentless elimination of hurry from your life. And he sort of makes this case that, Jesus was never in a hurry. He was often busy with lots of things that he was doing, but he was never in a hurry. Giving examples where, he's going across in a boat and he's resting while there's a storm, or, he's walking, or he's, people are looking for him, but he's off in the morning to a lonely place to pray and that sort of a thing. So this quote stuck with me, the relentless elimination of hurry from your life. So I'm just trying to think about how that can apply and how I can apply that. And I'm also kind of thinking about if I only read one thing or two things, what would they be, rather than selecting all these different things. So maybe if someone's listening right now and they're thinking, there's so much content. We're in a culture where there's just a barrage. You could just scroll endlessly on your phone. You can just scroll endlessly through Netflix. There's all kinds of streaming services. Okay, you have to binge watch programs. You're just constant flood of information. How can you eliminate all that? And how can you have silence? Can you have peace? Can you have an intentional mindset of eliminating all the noise and clutter and just say, I'm going to focus on one thing right now or whatever? Yeah, a lot of different thoughts there, but just throwing that out. See, what do you think about it?
Well, first of all, yeah, as you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking our culture definitely works against that in every possible way. Not only do we have all we're inundated with all the things you're talking about in regard to Netflix, and even all the content we have, it's not bad content, but it's just there's so much. And if you're taking in so many different voices talking about so many different topics, it seems to me that unless you are a rather unique individual, you're going to only take in a surface level of a lot of that, if anything. But the other thing, too, I think of in regard how this applies to apologetics, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on it, is, especially for people who are online doing apologetics, there's also this other side of it to where not only do we have all these things competing for our attention and taking away from that quiet or silence, but in regard to the hurry, we have this need to celebrate content production.
Yes.
So in other words, in other words, I mean, you know this better than anybody. The people getting up the most videos, or the people getting up the most articles, are the most effective. And so you also have that battling against it, because it's hard to sit and just be quiet. It's hard to sit and not be in a hurry when you feel like, oh, I've got to get this video done, or I've got to get this article up, or I've got to get a post up.
Yes. One thing, if we're bringing it back around to apologetics, so one thing that really comes to mind is something I've kind of gleaned from stuff that William Lane Craig has said about having this mindset of a turtle.
Oh, yes. Yes.
If you think about it, how he studied, he focused on the Kalam, however many years, and then he gives another
forever.
I'm going to study time for 7 years or whatever, and then I'm going to study the atonement for this big portion, and now I'm going to study this for the next 10 years. Now I'm kind of shooting from the hip there on the details, but
Sure.
And then he's talked about how he's got the church fathers he would read through, and there's volumes and volumes, but he'd just read a little bit a day and eventually get through them. And he's like, well, you'll be surprised at how far you can get if you just do a little bit every day. And so I've heard him say on a number of occasions, him and Jan, his wife, have had this mentality of a turtle mindset where you're just slow and steady, plodding through. And then at the end, you're like, well, look what's been built here. This is a real big thing. It's not a flash in the pan. It's something that's been built over years. And you can see that there's super depth there, but he has a real breadth as well. But you can't just decide, 2021, I'm going to do this.
Oh, right.
What am I going to achieve in the next quarter?
Well, and I wonder too, in regard to that turtle illustration that he shares, those of us who are sitting here and thinking, or listeners who are thinking, wow, I love this idea of quiet. I love this idea of finding quiet just to be before the Lord and hear what he has to say, or just to meditate on his word. But how do I do that? That seems so foreign to me, right? Because a lot of us, it is foreign. And maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe that turtle mentality of you just start out and you say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to set the timer on my phone or whatever for 5 minutes. And I'm just going to sit before the Lord, and with no expectations other than just spending time with him, maybe have a couple verses to meditate on, and then just build from there. I know that J.P. Moreland's newer book, Finding Quiet, is kind of an account. It's an account of his battle with anxiety and depression, which he's experienced major breakdowns in that area 2 different times. And one of the things he talks about in the book is this idea of sitting before the Lord and meditating on his word, and starting out, with 5 minutes and then extending that time. And he says that once you start doing it, it'll be one of those things where the time kind of flies by and you don't even realize how long you were sitting there.
Yes, the relentless elimination of hurry.
But I like that point that he makes, and it's, to be honest with you, it's something that I've never really thought about. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but you said that he mentions that Jesus is never in a hurry. Yeah, I'm thinking of the woman at the well. Here he was, and they're just passing through, right? Samaria. He has this interaction with this woman, and the account seems to communicate that, again, they're just passing through, and the disciples are off getting food and doing all this other stuff. Well, they end up staying there for what, like 3 days, I think it says. But that wasn't in their plan.
Yeah, I think we had talked about this in a previous podcast or episode, but the idea of Martha being a great example of being in a hurry, and where there's a perfect example of finding quiet, if you will. Stop all this busyness, stop all the running around, and just do the one thing that needs to be done at that moment, which is stopping all the things that seem so urgent.
Yeah, and I do want to give a kind of offhanded tip for people. If anybody's listening, the idea of quiet, if you have, and actually a lot of people have this condition, so it's not that odd to bring it up, but If you have tinnitus, which people will also call tinnitus, which is ringing in your ear, I have ringing in my left ear that never goes away. It's always there. And so sometimes a quiet room can be the worst thing for me. And so what I would recommend, if you just have a fan running or soft, maybe instrumental music playing, because for me, sometimes if it has words, I listen to the words. But something like that can still allow you to enjoy quiet in a sense. But it also kind of drowns out that ringing if that's something that would keep you from that time. And like I said, it's a pretty common condition. So hopefully that'll help somebody out there.
I did not know that.
Yeah, new fact.
I did not know that. I was going to roundly correct you on your first pronunciation there. Like, hey, it's not tinnitus or whatever it did.
Well, it's so funny because when I was diagnosed with it and I was going to these different doctors, they would do the other way around. So I would say, well, I'm struggling with tinnitus in my left ear because, I was, of course, like, I got to get rid of this. And they were like, actually, it's pronounced tinnitus. So I was like, wow. Oh, well, sorry. I'm like, well, then you guys, I felt like saying you guys have a PR problem then, because I think 99% of the world pronounces it tinnitus.
You guys aren't doing your jobs.
That's right. Right. Exactly. And there is a steady paycheck in it. So I don't know why they're not doing their job.
So shall we move on to a topic here? Pick a topic, Chad, anytime.
Yeah, well, it's an idea and I wanted to throw out. And it's really one of those ideas that I told my wife earlier that I'm hoping somebody hears it and runs with it. And if there is something like this out there that I'm completely ignorant of or unaware of, I would love somebody to contact us and just say, actually, there's this organization. One of the questions we answered from Jacob a few episodes ago, where he was talking about how there is this foreignness to people who are interested in apologetics and philosophy and science and things like that. And they're kind of the Star Wars convention people of the church. And there's this outsider feel to it. They own like Boba Fett helmets and stuff.
Now, earlier we talked about that was Star Trek. And there's a big difference.
I know. I purposely changed it so I could get in the Boba Fett joke. Come on, man. But anyway, so one of the things that I've seen in relation to that question, and we talked about it, we talked about it a little bit, was that while the church does a great job, I think, of sending people out to be missionaries or supporting people in music ministries or even people who want to become pastors. One of the things I see, and this is not to beat up on the Bride of Christ in any way, it's just, everyone has weaknesses. One of the things that's always bothered me since becoming a Christian at age 25 is that I've seen time and time again that there aren't many churches who are actually willing to support budding apologists or budding philosophers or even budding scientists in that way. And one of the things I would love to see happen, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this of what it could look like. And this is a very kind of bare bones idea because I don't have the background knowledge to actualize it. But one of the things I would love to see happen is there an organization that starts that offers scholarships to young men and women who are desiring to pursue degrees in Christian philosophy and apologetics, in science. We need Christian scientists. This is for people like, I have a friend who lives here locally in Maryland, and he has 4 children, and so his kids are homeschooled, so his wife's at home, and he's working, obviously, and but really for him to take classes, he's pursuing Christian philosophy at Biola, but he's taking the classes at such a slower pace because of the cost, And I would love something to exist out there for him to be able to apply to and say, hey, here's my situation. Here are my goals. Could you guys, offer me some type of scholarship? Yeah. Because more and more I see the need for Christian apologists, Christian philosophers, Christian scientists. And I think that that's one of the ways you talked about William Lane Craig earlier. One of the things I've heard him talk about is how the things that are happening in the philosophy department, generally will trickle down to the everyday man. Sometimes it takes 10, 15, 20 years, but it will happen. And so to me, why would we not want people in those departments that are pursuing that? And why would we not want to support that? Because it's going to benefit all of us. And so I, just to throw that out there to say, if you have the desire or the tools, if you have the tools and you have the talent, then that might be something that you want to pursue and begin to build that organization. I just, at this point in my life, don't have the wherewithal to do that.
Yeah.
But what do you think about that?
I think it's a good idea. I wonder if it's being done or has been done. I'd wonder, Biola, if you were talking to Biola about that, or SES, or the different, HBU, that sort of thing, if they had any information on that. And if there's anyone listening and that's part of those programs, contact us, let us know. We'll interview you and you can tell us all about it.
Yeah, and we'll share it as well.
The challenge is, just like, Jacob's question before, that some of these are cost restrictive. I mean, there's programs I would have done if I had a grant or a scholarship, but then again, how do you get that support? How do you qualify, so to speak? There would be obviously all those sort of questions to ask if there were a program like that, but maybe at the same time, it would be great if there are churches that have the resources or the size or that sort of mindset where they could say, well, we're supporting this just the way our church supports missionaries, like you said, like funding them.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that comes to mind as you're talking is that one of the things, if you listen to people like the late Larry Burkett, or currently it's David Ramsey, right, about money and how you spend your own money. One of the points that they'll always bring up is that when you look at your checkbook, nowadays when you look online at your account, but you get the idea, right? So when you look at the church's checkbook, if you will, how the church is spending their money, when we're spending money on missionaries, which, hey, I'm all for that. Please don't misunderstand me, or building up music ministry or building up those types of ministries. But yet there's no money being spent on, apologetics programs, even within the body, but also sending people out and supporting people. It does communicate what we as a body care about, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And if we're not careful, we can be viewed as, and I think we are viewed, unfortunately, by many outsiders as people who, and I mean outsiders in the way of like unbelievers or non-churchgoers. I don't mean like we're in the end, haha. But I think we are viewed as people who, care about presentation and appearance more than we do substance. And I think that's a real danger. But I would just love for, like, my friend whose name is Chase, I would love for Chase to have somewhere that he could contact and say, hey, here's my situation. Could you guys help me out? I mean, even if this organization could help out someone just to get them started, or give them a certain sum for the 4 years they study or 2 years they study, depending on their situation. Mm-hmm. Even if they could give money to people for some of these certification programs, like a one-shot deal, I think we'd be in a lot better place potentially than we are now if it was something that, took off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. I don't have any further thoughts on it, but one thing that does come to mind is there is a talk that was influential to me at one point, and it spurred me on to actually do that master's program. It was a talk by William Lane Craig. I think he gave it at the European Leadership Forum way back in probably 2007 or something. But it was entitled Tips for Budding Philosophers. And in that, he does talk about what you mentioned there, the part you mentioned about how things trickle down from academia, and the biggest shift will take place when there are Christian philosophers, Christian thinkers in places in academia, because there's going to have they're going to have a great deal of influence from that. So he gives advice in that talk saying, the best thing that you can do to make a difference is to get your PhD, get credibility and a place where you have a platform to speak that is really well educated, informed, and respected. Someplace in academia is going to do that. There's I'm sure a lot of people that that could speak to this way better than me, but if you're out there listening, you're like, what? You guys don't know anything. It's like, yeah, I know. Write us an email. We'll read it, But
right.
I've tried to link to that talk if I can find it again. But it was pretty good.
Yeah, and just a couple closing thoughts on this, and then we can move on to the next one. But another thing too is I've made jokes online before about, hey, I want to go to Biola. I need a benefactor. Any takers? Just joking around. And I had some people contact me and say, hey, I took out a loan, and I went to here, and it was really worth it. You should consider doing that. But there are people like my friend Chase who has certain convictions about going into debt. And I'm not saying that one's right and one's wrong or whatnot, but he has convictions about that. And so for him to have another avenue without having to go into debt would I think be, again, beneficial. And why would we not want to, as the body of Christ, invest in it? Mm-hmm. It seems to me that it's a win-win. Yeah. So yeah, and I agree with Brian. There, you might be sitting and you might be listening right now going, that's literally what I do. Okay, that's great. Contact us because we want to advertise for you. We want to say, hey, go to this organization. They can help you. It's just, I would just love to see more investment in the life of the mind within the body of Christ. I guess is kind of my summative statement.
Yeah. Well, moving on then. What else do you have for us?
I've been emailing and talking with a friend of mine. The conversation moved to email. He's one of my best friends. We have been talking about Christianity, Jesus, philosophy, atheism for easily over 10 years. And he is going back from being an atheist to an agnostic to being, and I'm using terms that, would rightly identify him. If he were here, he'd be saying yes, to angry, feeling like he's seeking God, but he's not able to find God. And so he's angry. So I'm just giving you kind of a context. And one of the things that we recently talked about was just salvation in general. And one of the things that he brought back to me was something I kind of wanted to put before you and just kind of hash it out and talk about it and see what you thought. First of all, I think that the question on the surface is one that is understandable that someone would have. So I don't at all want to, sometimes people, unfortunately, will demonize people who have questions about Christianity. I think it's one of the best things we can do is to ask questions. That's how we learn. And anyway, this is kind of the sum of what he said. He says this is kind of an objection or a struggle that he's having. He says Christians make up 31% of the world's population. Now, real quick, before I read the rest of the quote, I just wanted to let everybody know that I didn't know where he got that number. And so I was just curious and I Googled it. And that was the number that came up, 31%. So I'm assuming that he got that from Google, unless there is a survey out that I'm not privy to right now. So anyway, it says Christians make up 31% of the world's population. It seems problematic that God, who created us, can only manage to save 1/3 of his people. You will argue free will, but something is off here. If God loves us all, how can he be happy with 31%? That is a pathetic number. If I had 3 kids and could only save 1, I would change my course of action. Maybe create some modern day miracles or have actual signs or some actual signs. That's kind of the objection. And I just wanted to throw it out there and see what you thought. I have some thoughts, but I'm going to kick it over to you.
Right. Well, I feel like this is one that William Lane Craig has addressed before. It seems like many times. I hate to have to It seems like every podcast episode we like find a certain apologist and we just mention them like 5 times during the thing.
It was like Moreland the one time, it was Kokel, then it was Craig, and yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's not planned. It just happened.
Well,
you know.
In this case, I think I would link to that, or I'd send them a link and say, hey, this might be some good thoughts here. So my response to this is not going to match William Lane Craig's in its sophistication, thoroughness, or exactness. It would be one of those things that, if I wanted to answer it properly, I'd want to sit down and look over those things. Let's say I'm in a conversation with the person right at the moment, and this is what he says. I'd say, well, what percentage would be the right percentage? How many percent need to be saved for that not to be a problem with you? And then I might say, I would just lead with questions. If we're talking about what's the correct philosophical response or theological response, I would direct them to those people who've written larger responses that are very thorough, that have a lot of nuance and detail. But if it's conversational, my tack would be stick to questions, because anything I assert, I'm going to have to defend immediately. But this is the gentleman who's making the assertion. So I'm just going to ask him what percent is going to make that seem okay for him.
So behind that, sorry to interrupt, but behind that question, do I sense that you eventually might want to make the point that let's say he said, well, at least 50%. Then somebody could always come along and say, well, then there's 50% who don't make it.
Yeah, whatever number you take, someone will say, well, if they save 75%, they say, well, I have 4 kids and I can only save 3, then there's a problem. Are we saying that this person needs to embrace universalism in order to accept that God exists?
Right.
The other thing is that percentage goes up and down depending on what time frame you're looking at. And this is one sliver of history. So who's to know what the percentages are going to be at any given point in history? Maybe in order to get a certain ideal percentage, this person assumes that there's got to be some ideal percentage, then it requires a certain time frame where there's a lesser percentage. But I think asking questions like, how's God supposed to do that with free will? How is he going to coerce people? I think that some of the points that William Lane Craig makes and others is that there's certain things he's saying here, like maybe create some modern day miracles. There are certain things that may coerce belief. And I think Craig has said something along the lines of, if God were to write in the sky, Jesus is the way, or on every atom, made by God or something, then it would coerce belief and people can become embittered that they're being forced into this sort of submission. So I think from Craig's perspective, I think to tend to agree that God is wanting a love relationship there, and love does require some sort of free will aspect to it, or some sort of response that is not coerced or proven or something like that.
Well, and forced love to go along with that. Forced love is a contradiction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, love can't be forced. Otherwise, it's not, by definition, love. It has to be something freely given.
Yeah. And I think one thing I would want to try to find out, and I don't know the questions exactly I want to ask, would be, is this meant to be a proof of, well, God, if God existed, then he would be saving everyone? Or does this mean that, oh yeah, I see that God exists and I accept that, but I don't like his character because he, what's the background sort of belief that this is trying to argue for?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. That was one of the things that stuck out to me, was that let's say, for the sake of argument, that we take the whole statement and we just say, I'm granting you that everything you said here was true. Even if that's the case, the argument still doesn't demonstrate that Christian theism's false or that God does not exist. In my mind, I think at best, it either it demonstrates that God didn't do things the way he thinks God should have, or that he doesn't understand why God is doing things this way. Yeah. But that certainly doesn't invalidate Christian theism. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Also, a few thoughts on the miracle thing where he says, what does he say? He says, maybe create some modern day miracles or have some actual signs. I would say that even if we don't have any miracles happening today, if there's no healing, if none of those things are happening, we still have to deal with the arguments and the evidence for Christian theism. So we can't say, well, for me to believe, I have to have this, meaning I have to have this miracle, while ignoring all the evidence we do have.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So in other words, if there's enough arguments and evidence to make belief in God sufficient, which I would argue there is, then we don't need miracles. Like, I've never seen personally a miracle occur. I've never seen someone healed. I've heard testimonies and they're from people that I view as credible, but I've never personally seen a miracle. I never have, in the sense that he's talking about, but yet I firmly believe Christianity is true because I think I have sufficient evidence on other grounds. And so I would want to say, for someone offering this objection, that, while that would be a great piece of evidence, it would certainly be nice to have in the box of your collection of evidence for Christianity. I don't think it's necessary evidence.
Yeah.
Given the arguments and evidence that we do have. Also, I'm not convinced at all that miracles don't happen. A couple works that came to mind, Lee Strobel, he's written a book called The Case for Miracles. And in there, he documents credible cases of modern day miracles. And then, of course, on a more scholarly level, and by the way, we've talked about my love of memes, but I did see a really funny meme the other day where it said, "Modern miracles don't happen?" ? And then it says, "Have you met my friend Craig?" And then there's a picture of Craig Keener, And I thought that was funny.
Nice. Awesome.
Because that alludes to Keener's work, who's a former atheist, right? And he's done, he offers peer-reviewed cases of miracles in his 2-volume book, Miracles, the Credibility of the New Testament Accounts. You had the opportunity to interview him about that, I think. And so point being, and that's on Apologetics 3:15. So the point being is I'm not at all convinced that miracles don't happen, modern day miracles, that is. And then the last thing, and you and I have talked about this before in the past, I'm not at all 100% convinced that if someone witnessed a miracle, that would coerce belief as much as everyone thinks.
Yeah, well, at the last part of the bit, he says maybe create some modern day miracles or have some actual signs. The implication being, well, if there were signs and miracles, then people would believe. I mean, even in Jesus' time, people didn't believe, and he was doing things there. I mean, they wanted to kill him, or why didn't the Pharisees all convert? They had their own agenda,
right?
Or whatever, or hardened hearts, or what about Pharaoh? You know what I'm saying? So there's to think that a miracle or some sign is, I'm like, we talked about it in episode 3 there. Would you believe in the supernatural if my head got chopped off and sewn back on? And, come up with some naturalistic explanation first. So there's a lot of stuff in this question. It's interesting when you tease it out, because God, who created us, he can only manage to save a third of his people. Manage,
right?
That's interesting language. Maybe if it was phrased differently, like why aren't more people saved? If God is real, then why aren't more people saved? I mean, that's maybe the bottom of the whole question, but the way that it's written out, sort of, or the way it's spelled out there or asked, implies a little bit more than just that base sort of question.
Yeah, and I think, to add on to a couple things you said there, when you're saying something along the lines of God can only manage to save a third of his people, and then he goes on to say, you will argue free will, but something is off here. And that stuck out to me because it seems to me that one can't simply reject the response because something seems off. In other words, you have to demonstrate what is off. You can't just say, for example, if you're in a conversation, if I'm in a conversation with a skeptic and they offer like J.L. Schellenberg's divine hiddenness argument, which I think is a very challenging argument, no doubt about it. And I simply look at them and say, I don't know about that argument. Something seems off. Obviously, they're going to say, well, what? What's off? Is the argument sound or not? And so I understand that that's a person's way of saying that doesn't click with me, or that I don't quite get that or whatnot. But if you're going to say something's off with X, it seems to me that, you have to be able to give a little bit more of an explanation than that.
Yeah.
You mentioned too the people in Jesus's time, and I was even thinking of the Israelites who witnessed the plagues, and after Moses said, like, these are coming, a parting of the Red Sea, and yet they still turn their back on God. In some cases, they don't believe. But then I was also thinking of people that I've heard, atheists, give testimonies of things that they experienced when they were believers that they sincerely believed were of the Holy Spirit, were supernatural. And then after a while, the emotional appeal of those events kind of wear off, and they go on and convince themselves that these events had naturalistic explanations.
Yeah.
And so I think that I'm not saying that you go back to your point about coercion. I'm not saying that miracles would not coerce some people. I'm just saying, and I'm also not saying that God doesn't give those people a miracle, but I am saying that I think that sometimes we oversell that card.
Mm-hmm.
That, if God did miracles, everyone would believe, I'm not convinced. I'm skeptical of that claim. I'm very skeptical of it.
There's he says here, that's a pathetic number, 31%. If I had 3 kids and could only save one, I would change my course of action. I think about someone I know who has a couple of kids, and one kid got offended about something, and they haven't heard from that kid for 10 years. Now, the family loves the son. Family would do anything to have this person come back. So should I tell them, if they really loved their son, you should better change your approach here? Now, this son has free will. It's not up to the father or the mother to beg and plead and do everything they possibly can to get this person to stop being offended or independent or whatever reason they left the family. Now, this is not a one-to-one sort of analogy here between God, because, God is all powerful and he can move hearts and things like that. But
you're just continuing his analogy.
I'm only bringing out the aspect of free will. What do you want God to do? Override the free will? No, I want you back to the family, but I'm going to force you back in. How do you do that? How do you force someone back in? I guess that's the issue, where back to William Lane Craig talks about the feasibility of different possible worlds where everyone's saved, the maximal amount. I don't particularly enjoy putting those sorts of things in quantifiable terms, because it seems very cold and calculating, and what's in its philosophical language, and sort of comes away from connection with the people who aren't going to follow that very closely. But some things are not within your power once you give the power away. But God is doing that to enable the love relationship to be a possibility. And so what if there was 100%? Hey, these people don't really love you, because it would have to be free will in order to be love. And you can't tell me they would all love you freely. I don't know. I don't know what the response would be. It would seem like someone could always come up with some other sort of tack if they wanted to, come against God in that sort of situation. But you just simply can't force people to believe. And like you said, there's a lot of weight that's put on this idea that a miracle is going to make that happen.
Yeah. And I think too, just to kind of add on to what you're saying is I think of my own situation. I have 2 daughters, Emma and Lily, 12 and 13. And let's imagine that they come to a certain age and they begin to fall into a lifestyle that I don't approve of. Whether, let's say it's drug abuse, and it's eating them alive. And because I've seen that happen to relatives, and I see them destroying themselves. the analogy is absolutely right that I'm going to do everything in my power to keep this person, my child, from falling into this lifestyle. But at the end of the day, I can't control her choices minute to minute, moment by moment. And if she decides to buck my intervention because she has that free choice, she has that free will, then it is outside of what I have the power to do. I think that, this is going down a bit of a different route, and I would want to tease it out a bit. But, and again, you said that the analogy obviously isn't one-to-one because we're not all powerful. But even an all powerful being, how does an all powerful being force someone to love them? Right. I mean, it's still an all powerful being can't do something that's a contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
They can't make a squared circle. They can't make a married bachelor. That has nothing to do with power. That has everything to do with the fact that those things aren't things. In the same way, someone who's forced to love you is not really a thing.
Yeah. Part of the response that Christian or an apologist will come back with on this, a lot of it is going to depend on their theology as well, because there are various theological responses about God's choice, God's sovereignty. We're talking a lot about free will here, which there are many views that are not going to mesh with that very well, saying that this is God's choice. Whatever God wants to choose, that's his prerogative. I could imagine someone saying, hey, God only wants to save 31%, then that's fine with him. Who are you to say how many people he should save? So
Yeah,
I'm not going to comment down that giant rabbit trail. And people might get offended that I even call it a rabbit trail because, it's a main thoroughfare, you know what I mean? But I guess I'm trying to just think it through as how I would try to respond to someone in a way that's going to be make sense to them in a conversation. And obviously you have to understand the theological side of things, the philosophical side, and then there's how do you actually talk to someone about that? So if we try to come full circle, I would probably try to lead with questions and find out where that sort of objection's coming from. And then, as we've talked about before, there's the aspect of the relationship with the person and where they are in their journey, so to speak. And can you steer them a little bit closer?
Well, one of the great things in this interaction that I've been having with this guy over this time is that, we don't have to hold back and we can just tell each other what we really think. And none of us, there have been a few times over the years where he's been angry, but not so much at me just because of the situation, if you will. But one of the things is nice that we can kind of put all the cards on the table. And that makes it a lot more helpful because we know we both love each other. We care about each other. And so anything we say, we're not trying to hurt the other person or it's out of both desiring to understand to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
But if you don't mind, to sum up, I actually have a bit of a quote from this guy named William Lane Craig. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Have you heard of him? Yeah.
No, go ahead.
He's a philosopher, theologian, historian. He's got some good things to say. But a couple points he makes that I'll kind of close with, and then I'll share the quote. Is the first thing he says is that the Bible's very clear that what God desires for the unsaved. He said it is not his will that any should perish, but all should come to repentance. 2 Peter 3:9. Or in 1 Timothy 2:4, it says, he, meaning God, desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. And then in Ezekiel, it even says, this is God talking. He says, have I any pleasure in the death of the wicked, says the Lord. Now that you could look in Ezekiel 18:23, 32, and 33:11 for more from that. I'm just condensing it here. And so you see in the Bible that God is literally pleading with people to turn from their self-destructive nature and to be saved. So Craig goes on to point out that in this sense, it's really not God sending anybody to hell. And this harkens back to C.S. Lewis, right? If it's his desire that everybody be saved, he seeks and draws all people. If we make a free and well-informed decision to reject Christ for our sin, then God has no choice than to give us what we deserve. God will God does not send us to hell, but we send ourselves. And then he goes on to say that our eternal destiny lies in our own hands. It's a matter of free choice where we spend eternity. Those who are lost, therefore, are self-condemned. They separate themselves from God despite God's will in every effort to save them, and God grieves over their loss. And here's what he says in regard to this idea of why don't we see a bigger number of people being saved, if you will. He says this, and I'll end with this quote. He says, as a good and loving God, God wants as many people as possible to be saved and as few as possible to be lost. His goal then is to achieve an optimal balance between these, to create no more of the lost than is necessary to attain a certain number of the saved. But it's possible that the actual world, which includes the future as well as the present and past, which is a point you made, Brian, has such a balance. It's possible that in order to create this many people who will be saved, God also has to create this many people who will be lost. It's possible that had God created a world in which fewer people go to hell, there would be even fewer people that would go to heaven. It's possible that in order to achieve a multitude of saints, God had to accept a multitude of sinners.
Well, we'll link to that article in the show notes, so
yes,
the listeners can check that out. We're coming up to the end of our episode, so I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. Remember, you can find out a lot of other apologetics resources on the apologetics315.com website, along with the show notes, as I mentioned. If you have a question you'd like us to address, or just a message for us, feedback, good or bad, you either email us at podcast@apologetics315.com, or you can actually leave a voice message for us using a service called SpeakPipe. So you just go to the podcast page for today's episode, hit the link for leaving us a message, and you can record one for us. Remember, if you include a Ghostbuster quote in your question, you're guaranteed that it will get read and will also ensure 50% better quality answers.
That's a big Twinkie.
And you can find Chad's apologetic stuff over at Truthbomb Apologetics. That's truthbomb.blogspot.com. This is Brian Oughton.
And Chad Gross.
For the Apologetics 315 podcast, and thanks for listening.
Celebrate freedom of choice at Don Davis Auto Group. Ford, Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, Ram, and Nissan. And every kind of used car imaginable. We make the pursuit of happiness easy at Don Davis Auto Group in Arlington.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series,